It was a quiet spring afternoon when Olivia Bennett's life took an unexpected turn. A third-grade teacher in the small town of Eastfield, Olivia was known for her warm smile and calm nature. Married for 6 years to Daniel Bennett, a local mechanic with a charming reputation, Olivia believed her life was finally falling into place. At 32, she was pregnant with their first child, a long-awaited blessing after years of trying. The town celebrated her pregnancy. Olivia often joked that her belly was everyone's baby because even strangers offered her advice and knitted gifts. Daniel outwardly seemed thrilled. He attended doctor appointments, painted the nursery, and spoke endlessly about becoming a father. But cracks beneath the surface had already begun to widen, cracks Olivia hadn't noticed. Daniel had changed jobs a few months earlier, moving to a bigger auto shop on the edge of town. With the longer hours came a new circle of co-workers, late-night work emergencies, and weekends away at training sessions. Olivia, trusting and busy preparing for the baby, ignored her growing unease. Then came the routine blood work. Olivia's obstetrician, Dr. Ramirez, called her into the office personally, an unusual step. Confused but unconcerned, Olivia went alone, assuming it was a minor vitamin deficiency or some clerical error. Instead, she was told she was HIV positive. The news was so staggering that Olivia couldn't even speak. She sat frozen as Dr. Ramirez gently explained the results, the urgent need for antiretroviral therapy, and the high risk to the baby. Her mind struggled to catch up. Daniel was her only partner. There was no other explanation. Shock gave way to terror. How had this happened? What did it mean for the baby she had fought so hard to conceive? As the appointment ended, Dr. Ramirez quietly suggested that Olivia bring Daniel in for testing as well. Olivia stumbled out of the clinic and into the blinding sunlight, feeling as though the ground had been ripped out from under her feet. Olivia waited until late evening to confront Daniel. She sat on the living room couch, hands trembling, as the clock ticked past midnight. Daniel finally walked through the door, smelling faintly of oil, beer, and something unfamiliar. A cloying, sweet perfume that didn't belong to her. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. Her voice was eerily calm as she asked, "Can we talk?" Daniel slumped into the armchair across from her, kicking off his boots. He looked exhausted, but Olivia noticed his eyes darting nervously, as if sensing danger. She handed him the printout from the clinic without a word. For a long moment, Daniel simply stared at it. Then, too casually, he asked, "What's this?" "You gave me HIV, Daniel," Olivia said, her voice cracking only slightly. "You need to get tested. Tomorrow." The silence that followed was suffocating. Daniel rubbed his face roughly, then shook his head. "That's not possible," he muttered. You must have gotten it some other way." Olivia felt something inside her snap. "I haven't been with anyone else," she said coldly. "You know that." Cornered, Daniel's defensiveness turned to anger. He accused her of trusting the doctors too much, claimed mistakes happen all the time. But beneath his bluster, Olivia saw something worse. Guilt, deep, paralyzing guilt he couldn't mask. Eventually, after an hour of avoidance and denial, Daniel broke down. "I made a mistake," he whispered, avoiding her eyes. "It was just one time. A few months ago. She worked at the garage. It didn't mean anything." Olivia felt the room tilt. Her stomach churned violently, and for a moment she thought she might faint. "And you didn't think to tell me?" she rasped. "While I was carrying our child." Daniel started crying, messy, ugly sobs, but Olivia found herself eerily detached. His tears felt like a performance, a self-pitying attempt at absolution. Olivia stood up. "You're going to get tested," she said, "and you're going to move out. Tonight." Daniel begged her to reconsider, promising he would fix everything. He claimed he loved her, that it was just a terrible mistake, that he was scared. But Olivia didn't bend. For the first time in her life, she realized something chilling. Love wasn't enough. Trust, once shattered, couldn't be rebuilt with apologies. As Daniel packed a small bag and left, Olivia sat back down on the couch, hands resting protectively on her growing belly. She had no idea how she would survive what was coming, but she knew one thing for certain. She would fight for her baby, with or without Daniel. What Olivia didn't yet realize was that the worst damage had already been done. and that the path she was now on could only end in tragedy. Daniel's HIV test came back positive 2 days later. He received the call while staying at a motel just outside town. The confirmation, though expected, hit him harder than he anticipated. In the sterile silence of his cheap room, Daniel smashed a lamp against the wall, cursing himself, cursing the woman he had slept with, and, illogically, cursing Olivia for finding out. Meanwhile, Olivia sat in Dr. Ramirez's office again, this time with her mother Carol beside her. Her hands shook as the doctor explained the latest results. The antiretroviral therapy had been started just in time. There was a strong chance, though no guarantee, that her baby might avoid infection if treatment continued aggressively. Olivia nodded, absorbing every word with grim focus. She could not afford despair. Not yet. Her entire world now revolved around protecting the fragile life growing inside her. But Eastfield was a small town. Rumors spread like wildfire, and it didn't take long before whispers followed Olivia everywhere. At the grocery store, she noticed old acquaintances avoiding her aisle. At the pharmacy, she caught the judgmental stares of people who assumed they knew the full story. Daniel, too, felt the walls closing in. His co-workers at the garage knew something was wrong. He called in sick, then quit altogether after the shop manager privately told him it might be best if he took some time off. Even among his so-called friends, invitations to grab a beer stopped coming. Desperate to find someone to blame, Daniel began drinking heavily. Nights blurred into mornings, with empty bottles littering his motel room. The guilt he once showed Olivia had curdled into rage. At her, at the town, and most of all, at himself. Olivia, for her part, tried to shield herself from the town's cruelty. She returned to teaching, determined to maintain some semblance of normalcy. But it was impossible not to notice the subtle isolation. Colleagues who once sought her out for coffee now offered polite smiles from a distance. Parents hesitated before leaving their children alone with her, even though HIV was not transmitted through casual contact. Late at night, Olivia would sit alone in the baby's unfinished nursery, staring at the walls Daniel had painted, wondering how everything had unraveled so quickly. The fear that something might still go wrong, that she might lose the baby, gnawed at her constantly. What neither she nor Daniel realized was that the emotional firestorm they were trapped in was only growing stronger, and it was only a matter of time before someone got burned beyond recognition. The complications began 4 weeks later. Olivia was at school, leading a reading session with her students, when a sharp, cramping pain cut through her abdomen. She froze, gripping the edge of her desk as a wave of nausea and fear flooded her senses. One of the aides noticed her paling face and rushed to her side. Within the hour, Olivia was at Eastfield General Hospital, hooked to monitors. Dr. Ramirez arrived, her face tight with concern. The news was devastating. Olivia was experiencing preterm labor. Despite all precautions, the virus, or perhaps the stress it had unleashed, was taking its toll on her body. The hospital managed to halt the contractions temporarily, but Olivia was placed on strict bed rest. Her pregnancy was now officially classified as high risk. She cried quietly in her hospital room that night, feeling utterly alone. Daniel, meanwhile, had sunk even lower. His motel had evicted him for unpaid rent, and he was now crashing on the couch of a friend who barely tolerated him. He spent his days drunk, reading accusatory comments about himself online after someone leaked rumors about his affair and HIV status. He called Olivia once, leaving a rambling voicemail full of half apologies and drunken accusations. She didn't respond. The loss of control over his life enraged Daniel. In his mind, Olivia had ruined him. He blamed her for exposing the truth, for making him a pariah. His guilt had twisted into resentment, and resentment soon turned to dangerous fantasies of taking back what he had lost, or destroying it so no one else could have it. One night, in a drunken haze, Daniel drove to the house he used to share with Olivia. Sitting in his truck across the street, he watched the dark windows for hours. Seeing the "for sale" sign in the front yard made something crack inside him. He wasn't ready to let go, not like this. Olivia had betrayed him, he thought, by telling people about his affair. In his mind, she deserved the ruin that had come to her. Inside the hospital, Olivia remained oblivious to the storm gathering outside her carefully controlled world. She spent her days staring at the gray ceiling tiles, willing herself to stay strong for the baby, counting each day as a small victory. But fear gnawed at her constantly. Fear for her child's health, fear for her future, and deep down, a gnawing fear she refused to name, fear of Daniel. She hadn't seen him in weeks, but somehow she knew this wasn't over. Daniel was the type of man who didn't know how to lose gracefully. She had seen flashes of his temper before, never physical, but enough to plant seeds of doubt now that the stakes were so much higher. Outside, unseen and festering, Daniel's anger was evolving into something much more dangerous. It was only a matter of time before their paths crossed again, with devastating consequences. The loss came on a rainy Tuesday morning. Olivia had been in the hospital for nearly 2 weeks when the alarms blared on the monitor beside her bed. Nurses rushed in as she gasped through a wave of intense pain, feeling something unmistakably wrong. Dr. Ramirez arrived moments later, her face grave but composed. Despite every effort, Olivia's body had gone into full labor far too early. The delivery was harrowing. Olivia, exhausted and disoriented, heard only snippets of urgent conversation. Distress, oxygen levels, prep NICU, then silence. When Olivia awoke later, the room was darker, the machines quieter. Carol sat beside her, gripping her hand so tightly it hurt. Dr. Ramirez stood at the foot of the bed, her face a mask of compassion and sorrow. The baby, a little girl Olivia had already named Emma, hadn't survived. The virus hadn't passed to the baby, the doctor explained gently. But the trauma Olivia's body had endured, combined with relentless stress, had proven too much. Emma had been born alive but lived only minutes. Olivia's world shattered into a million pieces. The days that followed blurred into a fog of grief, sedatives, and empty hospital corridors. Cards and flowers arrived from a few brave colleagues, but most of Eastfield remained silent. Olivia's mother stayed at her side, but even Carol seemed helpless to reach her. Daniel found out through a mutual acquaintance. Drunk, he ranted to his friend about how it was Olivia's fault, that her dramatics had killed the baby. That night, Daniel drove again to Olivia's house. He sat in his truck for hours, staring at the dark windows, breathing heavily. His mind swirled with twisted thoughts. If he couldn't have the life he lost, neither should she. 2 days later, Olivia was released from the hospital. She returned not to her home. The memories there were too painful, but to her mother's small 2-bedroom house across town. Eastfield's silence grew heavier. In public, people whispered about her behind cupped hands. No one approached her directly, but the looks were louder than words, a mixture of pity, fear, and cruel judgment. At night, Olivia often woke from nightmares where she heard a baby crying somewhere far away. Other nights, she jolted awake certain that someone was standing outside her window, watching. She wasn't wrong. Daniel had become a ghost on the edges of her life, lurking unseen but not unfelt. His anger, once inward, was now searching for a target, and Olivia, broken and vulnerable, was an easy mark. The collision course between them was now inevitable, and when it happened, it would leave scars no one could erase. The first direct threat came 2 weeks after Olivia's release from the hospital. It was a Sunday afternoon. Olivia sat at her mother's kitchen table, pushing a bowl of cold soup around with her spoon, unable to summon any appetite. Carol had gone to church, leaving Olivia alone in the small house for a few hours. The knock at the door was soft at first. Olivia stiffened. Visitors had become rare, almost non-existent. She approached the window cautiously and peered out through the curtains. No one was on the porch. The second knock was louder, insistent, almost angry. A chill prickled along Olivia's spine. She hesitated, debating whether to answer. Then, a third knock, so hard it rattled the door in its frame. This time, a voice followed, slurred, low, unmistakable. "Liv, open up. We need to talk." "Daniel." Olivia backed away from the door, heart pounding. She grabbed her phone, hands trembling, and dialed 911. Her voice cracked as she whispered into the receiver. "My ex-husband is outside. He's not supposed to be here. I think he's drunk." The dispatcher kept her on the line, instructing her to stay inside and out of sight. Meanwhile, Daniel pounded again, then cursed loudly, slurring accusations. "You ruined my life, Liv! You think you're better than me? You think they'll protect you?" Olivia crouched behind the couch, barely breathing, listening to his fists batter the door. She flinched at the sound of something, maybe a flower pot, smashing against the porch railing. Sirens approached. Daniel's ranting cut off abruptly. By the time police arrived, he was gone. The responding officers, two young deputies who clearly knew both Olivia and Daniel from town, took her statement. They were sympathetic, but non-committal. "Unless he breaks in or harms you, it's tough," one said with an apologetic shrug. "We can issue a warning, but it's complicated." The word echoed bitterly in Olivia's mind long after they left. Later that night, she found a note tucked under the welcome mat, a torn scrap of paper, the handwriting messy and angry. "You can't hide from me." That night, Olivia barely slept, jumping at every creak of the old house. She kept a kitchen knife beside her bed, a ridiculous but necessary talisman against the fear gnawing at her from the inside out. Carol, worried but pragmatic, suggested getting a restraining order. Olivia agreed. But part of her knew it would be just another piece of paper Daniel could, and likely would, ignore. Across town, Daniel nursed another bottle of whiskey, seething over how weak Olivia had made him feel. In his mind, he had nothing left to lose, and that made him more dangerous than ever. The invisible thread tying them together had grown taut. It wouldn't take much more for it to snap. And when it did, blood would follow 2 days after the terrifying confrontation. Olivia and her mother sat stiffly in the small, wood-paneled office of Eastfield's courthouse filing for a restraining order, felt both empowering and humiliating. She hated admitting, even on paper, that she was afraid of Daniel, but fear was now stitched into every part of her daily life. The judge approved the temporary protective order within hours. It prohibited Daniel from contacting Olivia, coming within 200 feet of her or Carol's home, her workplace, or any place she might reasonably be expected to visit. If he violated it, he could be arrested immediately. It should have been a relief. Instead, Olivia felt only a fragile, paper-thin sense of safety. Carol reinforced the windows. Olivia started carrying her phone everywhere. Even into the shower, she bought a can of pepper spray, kept a baseball bat beside her bed. Still, a nagging dread gnawed at her. Daniel wasn't rational anymore. A restraining order would be nothing more than a dare. At first, Daniel kept his distance, physically. Instead, the attacks shifted into a more insidious form. Late one night, Olivia's phone buzzed with an unknown number. She didn't answer. Minutes later, a second call, then a text. "You think a piece of paper can save you?" She blocked the number, heart racing. The next morning, Olivia found the side mirrors of her car smashed, glass sparkling like deadly confetti across the driveway. Carol tried to convince her it could have been random vandalism, but they both knew better. Olivia reported each incident to the police, but the pattern was clear. Daniel was smart enough to leave no direct evidence tying him to the crimes. Without proof, there was little they could do. Meanwhile, Daniel spiraled deeper into paranoia and resentment. He believed Olivia had poisoned the town against him. He hated how she looked stronger every time he saw her from the shadows. In his warped mind, she had taken everything. His reputation, his child, his future. And she needed to pay. His drinking worsened. His fantasies grew darker. He began imagining scenarios where he could confront Olivia properly, force her to listen, to admit her guilt. Each night he sat alone, sketching out ideas that danced on the razor's edge between obsession and premeditation. One night, while walking to her car after a late therapy appointment, Olivia thought she heard footsteps behind her. She spun around, but saw no one. Still, the feeling of being hunted lingered. That night, as she double-checked the locks for the third time, she realized something terrifying. Daniel wasn't just angry anymore. He was planning something. It happened on a Thursday evening, the night Olivia realized no restraining order would protect her. Carol had gone out briefly to pick up groceries. Olivia stayed behind, curled up on the living room couch, pretending to read. Outside, the wind howled against the windows, carrying the first hints of an approaching storm. A sharp noise shattered the illusion of calm, a heavy thud against the side of the house. Olivia's head snapped up. She held her breath, listening. Another thud, this time closer to the back door. She moved cautiously to the kitchen, peeking through the blinds. At first she saw nothing, but then a flash of movement, someone circling the house. Her blood froze. Without thinking, she grabbed her phone and dialed 911, whispering urgently into the receiver. As she spoke, she saw a figure at the back door, struggling with the handle. Daniel. He was trying to force his way in. "Stay on the line, ma'am," the dispatcher said. "Units are on the way. Stay hidden if you can." Olivia dropped to the floor, heart hammering so loudly she could barely hear the dispatcher's words. She crawled toward the hallway, ducking into the laundry room, the only room with a door she could lock. Moments later, she heard the unmistakable sound of glass shattering. He was inside. Tears filled her eyes as she jammed the laundry room door shut and turned the flimsy lock. She held her breath, listening to Daniel's heavy footsteps stomping through the house, slurring her name. "Liv, you think you can hide from me? After everything you did?" The door handle rattled violently. Olivia pressed herself into the corner, clutching her phone as if it were a weapon. She whispered her location to the dispatcher, praying the police would arrive before Daniel got through. The minutes dragged like hours. Just as Daniel began pounding against the door, she heard sirens wailing in the distance. Daniel hesitated, growling a string of curses. Then the sound of retreating footsteps, the crash of a door slamming open, and silence. By the time the officers burst into the house, Daniel was gone. They found Olivia curled in the corner, shaking uncontrollably. One officer stayed with her while the others combed the neighborhood, but it was useless. Daniel had vanished into the stormy night like a ghost. The break-in changed everything. It wasn't harassment anymore. It was a declaration of war. The police took the incident seriously now, but Olivia still felt the cracks in the system. An arrest warrant was issued for Daniel. But in a town like Eastfield, hiding wasn't hard. Friends, old contacts, anyone could be sheltering him, even unknowingly. The small-town familiarity that had once made Eastfield feel safe now felt suffocating, even lethal. Olivia knew, deep in her bones, that Daniel wouldn't run far. He hadn't come to rob or scare her. He had come for her, and he would come again. This time, he wouldn't be satisfied with breaking windows. This time, he would be ready to finish what he had started. The morning after the break-in, Olivia made a decision she once would have considered unthinkable. She bought a gun. Carol protested at first. Eastfield wasn't the kind of town where women like Olivia carried weapons. But Olivia's mind was made up. She wasn't the same trusting person she had been months ago. That woman had died with her daughter. At the small gun shop off Main Street, Olivia felt every pair of eyes on her as she filled out the paperwork. She endured the judgment in silence. When the clerk, a heavy-set man with a thick beard, asked if she needed help selecting a firearm, she simply said, "Something small, something I can use if I have to." She left the store with a basic revolver and a heavy box of guilt she carried as tightly as the weapon itself. Meanwhile, Daniel wasn't idle. He had left town after the break-in, hiding out in a battered trailer on the edge of a neighboring county, drinking heavily, brooding, and planning. His rage had curdled into something colder, more methodical. He wasn't going to make the same mistake twice. Daniel knew Olivia was scared. That was good. Fear would keep her isolated, paranoid, exhausted. He didn't want another public scene. He wanted her alone, vulnerable. He wanted her to know, in her last moments, that she had lost. Over the following days, Olivia tried to reclaim a sense of control. She took self-defense classes at a nearby community center. She reinforced the locks at Carol's home. She even installed security cameras. Every step she took, however, felt like building a wall made of tissue paper against a hurricane. The tension stretched her thin. She snapped at Carol over small things. She barely slept. Every noise at night jolted her awake, heart hammering, fingers gripping the gun she kept tucked under her pillow. But the worst part was the waiting. Every day that passed without seeing Daniel tightened the knot of fear in her chest. She knew he wasn't gone. He was just waiting for the perfect moment. And then, without warning, a new letter arrived. No envelope. Just a single sheet of paper slipped under the front door, written in Daniel's unmistakable scrawl. "You can't run. You can't hide. I'm already closer than you think." Carol wanted to call the police immediately, but Olivia stopped her. The police couldn't protect her. She knew that now. No one could, except Olivia herself. She slept with the revolver on the nightstand, every nerve in her body tuned to the smallest sound. She wasn't going to run. If Daniel came for her again, she would be ready, or die trying. What Olivia didn't realize was that Daniel had already made his final plan, and this time he had no intention of letting either of them walk away. It happened on a Friday night, under the cover of heavy rain. Carol had gone to stay with a cousin for the weekend, reluctantly leaving Olivia alone at her urging. Olivia thought being alone might draw Daniel out, let her control the confrontation on her terms. She hadn't realized how quickly that moment would come. The power went out shortly after midnight. At first, Olivia thought it was the storm, but when she peered through the window, she noticed something chilling. The neighboring houses still had lights, only their home had gone dark. Her skin prickled with awareness. She moved quickly, checking the locks again, retrieving the revolver from her nightstand. Her hands were steady, heart racing but steady. She crouched in the shadows of the living room, straining to hear past the pounding rain. At first, only silence. Then, faintly, the unmistakable creak of the back porch step. Daniel. He wasn't trying to be stealthy anymore. This wasn't stalking. This was an attack. The doorknob twisted once, twice, then a harsh thud as Daniel threw his full weight against the door. Olivia backed toward the hallway, gun in hand, heart slamming against her ribs. The front door, another crash. She realized with dawning horror he wasn't alone. Daniel had brought someone with him. Panic surged, but she fought it down. Think, move. She retreated to the hallway, aiming the revolver at the door. She had taken the classes. She knew the rules. Don't hesitate. Don't warn. If they break in, you shoot to protect yourself. The door splintered inward. Daniel stumbled into the house, drenched and wild-eyed, a crowbar clutched in one hand. Behind him, another figure, a man Olivia didn't recognize, followed close, carrying a baseball bat. Olivia's voice was hoarse but firm. "Stop, I have a gun." Daniel laughed, an ugly, broken sound. "You won't do it, Liv. You never had the guts." The stranger moved first, lunging forward. Olivia fired instinctively. The crack of the gunshot split the air. The stranger dropped, screaming, clutching his leg. Daniel roared and charged. Olivia fired again, missed. Then Daniel slammed into her, sending the gun skittering across the floor. She fell hard, the air knocked from her lungs. Daniel grabbed her by the hair, dragging her backward. "You ruined everything!" he screamed, spittle flying into her face. "You killed my daughter! You deserve this!" Through the haze of pain and terror, Olivia fought wildly, kicking, scratching, doing anything to break free. Her fingers brushed something cold, the fallen revolver. She gripped it and pulled the trigger, a deafening blast. Daniel staggered back, shock and fury etched into his features. He looked down at his abdomen, where blood was already blooming across his shirt. He stumbled and collapsed onto the floor. Olivia scrambled away, shaking violently, the revolver still clutched in her hand. The second man groaned from the corner, immobilized, the house filled with the scent of gunpowder and blood. And then, sirens again, growing louder, closer. But it was already too late. Nothing could undo what had happened. Nothing could make Olivia whole again. The front door swung open with a crash as officers flooded the house, weapons drawn. Olivia stood frozen near the wall, the revolver hanging loosely from her blood-smeared hand. A young deputy barked orders she barely heard. "Drop the weapon! Hands where we can see them!" Slowly, mechanically, Olivia set the gun on the floor and raised her trembling hands. Two officers moved in quickly, cuffing her wrists behind her back. The cold snap of metal against her skin jolted her back into reality. He broke in," she stammered. "He tried to—" "Ma'am, we'll get your statement at the station," one deputy said, his voice professional but distant. Paramedics rushed to Daniel's side. His face was ashen, his breathing shallow, blood pooling under him. They worked quickly, shouting vitals back and forth, but Olivia could see the truth even before they confirmed it. Daniel was dying. The accomplice, later identified as a drifter Daniel had met during his weeks in hiding, was alive, screaming in pain from the gunshot wound to his leg. Olivia was placed in the back of a cruiser, wet hair clinging to her face, shivering uncontrollably. She watched through the rain-streaked window as the paramedics wheeled Daniel's limp body out on a gurney, pounding his chest rhythmically in a desperate attempt to revive him. But deep down, she knew he wasn't coming back. At the station, Olivia was processed like any other suspect. Fingerprints, mugshot, bloodied clothes placed in evidence bags. The detectives who questioned her, Detectives Harris and Monroe, were more sympathetic than the deputies who had arrested her. Still, they pressed her hard, needing to establish every detail: why she had bought the gun, why she hadn't fled, whether she had lured Daniel into the house. The questions stung more than she expected. It didn't matter that Daniel had broken in. It didn't matter that there was a restraining order, a long documented history of threats, violence, stalking. In the cold world of legal procedures, everything had to be questioned. Everything had to be doubted. "You need to understand," Detective Harris said gently. "In cases like this, it's not always clear-cut. The DA will decide whether to file charges." Charges. The word landed like a blow. Meanwhile, news spread quickly through Eastfield. Small towns loved a tragedy almost as much as they loved a scandal. Some people viewed Olivia as a hero. Others whispered that she had baited Daniel, that she had wanted this outcome. The weight of it crushed her. In the early hours of the morning, sitting in a gray interview room with a scratchy blanket around her shoulders, Olivia learned the news officially. Daniel Bennett had been pronounced dead at Eastfield General Hospital at 2:37 a.m. Cause of death: exsanguination from a gunshot wound to the abdomen. There would be an autopsy, there would be an investigation, and there would be a reckoning. But for now, Olivia sat in silence, staring at the blood on her hands that no amount of scrubbing would ever fully wash away. The district attorney's office called Olivia 3 days later. She was at Carol's kitchen table, staring blankly at a cup of untouched coffee when the phone rang. The voice on the other end was crisp, detached. "Miss Bennett, we'd like you to come in for an interview regarding the investigation into Daniel Bennett's death." It wasn't a request. Olivia arrived at the courthouse accompanied by her lawyer, a seasoned woman named Maria Greer, who had taken her case pro bono after hearing about it on the news. Maria had warned her. The DA was under political pressure. A dead man, a gun, a divided town. Someone would demand accountability. The meeting was clinical, businesslike. The assistant district attorney, Colin Avery, asked detailed questions about the restraining order, the night of the shooting, the previous threats. Olivia answered as best she could, reliving each horrific second under the sterile buzz of fluorescent lights. Then came the harder questions. Why didn't you leave the house when you realized he was coming? Did you provoke Mr. Bennett in any way? Could you have retreated safely without firing the weapon? Every question chipped away at her, suggesting, subtly but unmistakably, that she had chosen violence, that she hadn't done enough to avoid bloodshed. Maria pushed back hard, reminding the DA's office about the break-in, the history of abuse, the previous threats, reminding them that the law allowed Olivia to defend herself inside her own home. Still, Olivia left the meeting hollowed out, a ghost in her own skin. Back in Eastfield, the divisions widened. Someone spray-painted "murderer" across the for sale sign still posted in front of Olivia's former home. At the grocery store, one woman hugged her tightly, whispering, "You did what you had to do." Another woman loudly muttered, "Killer," as Olivia passed by. Even some of Daniel's old friends, the ones who had once distanced themselves from him, now romanticized his death, calling him troubled and Olivia cold-hearted. The town wasn't big enough for neutrality. Everyone had taken a side. Carol tried to shield her daughter, but Olivia had already withdrawn inward. She slept fitfully, ate little, and spent long hours sitting in silence, staring into nothing. The dreams were the worst. She dreamed of Daniel standing at the foot of her bed, blood leaking from the wound she had inflicted, whispering accusations she could never silence. One afternoon, a brown envelope arrived by courier. Inside, a copy of the autopsy report, the police file, and an official notice. The DA's office had concluded its review. Olivia would not be criminally charged. The shooting had been deemed justifiable self-defense. No indictment, no trial. On paper, she was free. But the moment Olivia read the words, she didn't feel relief. She felt emptier than she had ever felt before. The law had absolved her, but her soul had not. Freedom, Olivia learned, was a strange and bitter thing. She could walk the streets of Eastfield without handcuffs. She could enter a store, sit in a cafe, go to the post office. But she was not truly free. The stares followed her everywhere. Furtive glances, whispered conversations that stopped the moment she entered a room. She could feel the weight of their judgment, their curiosity, their fear. Olivia tried, at first, to reclaim some semblance of normalcy. She returned briefly to the elementary school where she had once taught, hoping to ease back into her old life. But it became immediately clear that things had changed. Parents complained quietly to the principal. Some pulled their children from her class. Others, more subtly, just avoided her altogether. Staff meetings became tense, every word measured. After only 3 weeks, Olivia resigned. Carol encouraged her to leave Eastfield altogether, start fresh somewhere no one knew her story. But Olivia resisted. Part of her couldn't imagine beginning again. Another part believed she didn't deserve a new start. Nights were the hardest. Sleep, when it came, was shallow and haunted by vivid nightmares. In some dreams, she relived the night Daniel broke into the house. The crowbar, the shattered glass, the gun slipping through her fingers. In others, more cruel, Emma, the daughter she had never truly known, appeared, crying for a mother who couldn't protect her. Olivia began seeing a trauma counselor in a neighboring town. The sessions were brutal, peeling back layers of guilt and rage she barely acknowledged in her waking hours. "I hate him," she said once, voice trembling. "But I hate myself more." The counselor said it was normal. Survivors often carried the burden of their abuser's sins. Rationally, Olivia understood. Emotionally, she felt poisoned. Meanwhile, Eastfield moved on in its own way. Daniel's funeral had been a surprisingly well-attended affair, with former friends and estranged relatives emerging to mourn a man they had barely tolerated in life, but now glorified in death. Obituaries spoke of Daniel's troubled spirit, his tragic end. No mention was made of the restraining orders, the stalking, the terror he unleashed. History, Olivia realized bitterly, was written by the survivors, and sometimes by the liars. One evening, while sitting alone at the town's small library, Olivia came across an online article shared by a local blog. The Tragedy of Daniel Bennett, How a Small Town Lost One of Its Own. The comments below it were brutal. She snapped. She set him up. She was always strange. Now we know why. Olivia shut the laptop with shaking hands. It didn't matter what the truth was. In Eastfield, perception was reality. And in their eyes, she was permanently tainted. Not by HIV, not by her grief, but by the simple, ugly fact that she had survived when they thought she shouldn't have. The real battle, Olivia realized, wasn't over. It had only just begun. The breaking point came on a humid afternoon in late July. Olivia had ventured out to the local pharmacy to pick up a prescription, simple anxiety medication her counselor had recommended. She moved through the store quickly, keeping her head down, avoiding the curious glances that seemed to follow her everywhere. At the register, she felt it before she heard it. The shift in the room's atmosphere, the sudden hush. "That's her," someone whispered behind her. Olivia kept her eyes on the credit card reader, willing the transaction to move faster. Another voice, sharper, cut through the tense silence. "You should be in prison." Olivia turned slowly. It was a woman she recognized vaguely, a cousin of one of Daniel's old friends, someone who had been at his funeral. The woman's face was twisted in disgust, her fists clenched at her sides. "I hope you rot," the woman spat. Olivia's throat tightened. She grabbed her bag and hurried out of the store, the weight of unseen eyes pressing against her back. She made it to the car before the first sob tore loose. Raw, violent, uncontrollable. She sat behind the wheel for a long time, hands trembling, feeling something inside her finally crack. Later that night, after Carol had gone to bed, Olivia sat alone at the kitchen table, the bottle of anxiety pills in front of her. The house was silent except for the occasional creak of settling wood and the distant hum of cicadas outside. She stared at the bottle for a long time, the weight of her loneliness pressing down like a physical force. No one in Eastfield wanted her here. No one would ever see her as anything but a scar on their story. She thought of Emma, the baby girl she had never held, never soothed, never protected. She thought of Daniel's face, not as he had been the night he died, but as he had been when they first fell in love, reckless, smiling, holding promises he would never keep. She thought about how she would never again know peace. The gun, the same one she had used to defend herself, still sat in the locked box in her bedroom. It would be so easy, she thought, frightening herself with the coldness of the thought. So easy to end the whispering, the judgment, the grief that gnawed at her day and night. But when she imagined Carol finding her, something shifted. Not pity, not fear, a flicker of rage. Why should she die to make them more comfortable? Why should she pay, again and again, for surviving? Her hands moved automatically, sweeping the bottle of pills off the table and into the trash. She sat back, chest heaving, feeling the tears slide silently down her face. She was still broken, still grieving, still hated. But for the first time in months, a tiny, defiant voice rose inside her. Not today. Tomorrow would be another battle, and maybe she would lose. But tonight, at least, she chose to stay. The decision came quietly, without ceremony. A week after that terrible night in the kitchen, Olivia sat with Carol on the back porch, nursing a cup of tea gone cold. The cicadas buzzed in the thick summer heat, and somewhere down the road, children's laughter floated faintly through the air. It hurt to listen to it. "I'm selling the house," Olivia said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Carol turned to her, startled. "You're sure?" "I can't stay here," Olivia said. "Not like this. Maybe not ever again." Carol nodded slowly, pain flashing in her eyes. She understood. She had watched her daughter wither day by day under the town's silent cruelty. Staying would be death by 1,000 cuts. Within days, Olivia put the house, the last tie to her old life, up for sale. She packed her belongings into cardboard boxes, each item a small dagger. The baby clothes she had bought but never used, the books she once read to prepare for motherhood, the photo albums filled with smiles that now felt like lies. She planned to move 2 states over, to a small town where no one knew her name, her story, or her shame. The night before her departure, Carol hosted a small gathering at the house. Just family and the handful of friends Olivia had left. A gesture of support, an acknowledgement of survival. It should have been a quiet, bittersweet farewell. But Eastfield had one last cruelty to deliver. As guests arrived, Olivia noticed something odd. The occasional glance at their phones, the murmured conversations that died when she approached. She didn't have to wonder long. One of the younger cousins, oblivious to the tension, blurted it out while piling a plate with food. "There's a memorial fundraiser for Daniel, downtown, tonight." Olivia blinked. "What?" "They're putting up a bench in the park. You know, in his memory. There's a big event." The words struck like physical blows. A bench, in the center of town. A permanent monument to the man who had hunted her like prey, who had infected her, who had killed their child. And Eastfield would sit on it, eat lunch by it, take smiling photos next to it, as if he had been some tragic victim instead of the architect of so much pain. Carol's face went rigid with fury. She opened her mouth, likely to unleash something sharp, but Olivia shook her head. It wasn't worth it. It would never be worth it. Later, alone in her childhood bedroom, Olivia sat on the floor surrounded by moving boxes. She stared at the half-packed remains of her life and realized something chilling. Eastfield had never wanted the truth. It wanted a story that made sense, a story where monsters didn't live next door, A story where the survivor could be safely blamed and tucked away. They needed Daniel to be a misunderstood soul, a cautionary tale, a broken boy undone by circumstance. And they needed Olivia to be the villain. Otherwise, they would have to admit the truth, that they had failed to see the real danger until it was too late. Olivia wept, not for herself this time, but for the life that might have been, for Emma, for the future she had once believed in, for the truth that no memorial bench could ever erase. Tomorrow she would leave. But tonight, she mourned everything Eastfield had buried long before Daniel's death. And she knew that no matter how far she ran, some ghosts would follow. Because some wounds never healed. They only learned how to bleed quietly. The morning Olivia left Eastfield was gray and still. There were no dramatic goodbyes, no send-offs or words of encouragement. Just Carol's tight hug on the porch, a lingering squeeze of the hand, and a whispered, "Call me when you get there." Olivia nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. She loaded the last of her boxes into the battered sedan she had bought secondhand. Her old life, 32 years of memories, heartbreak, and hope, compressed into the trunk and back seat. Before pulling away, Olivia hesitated. A part of her wanted to leave without looking back, to treat Eastfield like the scene of a crime, something she could blot from her memory if she just drove fast enough. But another part, the stubborn part that had survived Daniel, demanded acknowledgement, closure, or at least something like it. She turned onto Main Street, driving slowly past the familiar landmarks, the faded diner, the post office, the church where she had once imagined christening her daughter, and finally, the town square. The bench was already installed, new and gleaming, polished to a painful shine. It sat beneath the oldest oak tree, surrounded by a small plaque. In loving memory of Daniel Bennett, a life gone too soon. Fresh flowers rested at the base, lilies and carnations tied together with a blue ribbon. Olivia pulled the car to the curb and sat staring at it. Pedestrians moved around the square, chatting, sipping coffee, laughing. Children played nearby, their shouts of joy carried on the wind. No one looked at the bench with sadness. No one looked at it with anger. It had already become just another part of the town, sanitized, simplified. Olivia felt her heart harden. This was how it would always be, the truth buried, the violence forgotten, the victim erased. She could fight it. She could scream and rage until her voice gave out, and it wouldn't change a thing. She put the car back into gear. As she passed the bench, she whispered, barely loud enough to hear herself, "I survived you." The words weren't triumphant. They weren't bitter. They were simply true. Daniel had taken so much, her trust, her future, her child. But he hadn't taken everything. Olivia was still breathing, still moving forward, still here. And no matter what Eastfield chose to remember, that was a kind of victory they could never steal from her. The road out of town stretched ahead, a long, uncertain ribbon of asphalt. Olivia gripped the steering wheel tighter and pressed her foot down. She didn't know what waited for her beyond the horizon, but for the first time in a long time, she was willing to find out. And that, the willingness to hope, however fragile, was enough for today. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, flanked by fields and low hills that shimmered in the summer heat. Olivia drove with the windows cracked open, letting the warm wind whip through the car. The rhythmic hum of the tires against the asphalt filled the silence, a steady, almost comforting sound. Hour after hour, she watched the landscape blur past, her mind turning over memories she could neither escape nor fully confront. She thought of Daniel, not just the monster he had become, but the boy he had once been. The boy who had kissed her under the bleachers after homecoming. The boy who had promised her forever in a battered pickup truck with a rusted hood. She thought of Emma, the baby who had existed only long enough to prove how fragile life could be. Sometimes, in the quiet hours of the night, Olivia still imagined holding her. Still imagined what her laugh might have sounded like, what it might have felt like to be called Mom. The grief, once a raw, open wound, had become something heavier, like a stone she carried everywhere, impossible to set down, impossible to ignore. At a small roadside diner somewhere past the state line, Olivia pulled over. She sat in the car for a long moment before finally gathering the courage to go inside. The place was nearly empty. A few truckers hunched over plates of eggs and coffee, a waitress wiping down a booth. No one stared at her. No one whispered. No one knew her name. The anonymity was both terrifying and liberating. She ordered black coffee and toast, her appetite barely more than a formality. As she stirred cream into her cup, she realized that survival wasn't the triumphant thing the movies made it seem. It was quieter, lonelier, messier. Survival was remembering birthdays that would never come. It was flinching when a door slammed too hard. It was carrying the knowledge that some people would rather build monuments to their abusers than face the uncomfortable truth. Survival wasn't about moving on. It was about learning how to exist alongside the wreckage. Olivia finished her coffee and paid the bill with a few crumpled bills pulled from her pocket. When she stepped outside, the sun was starting to set, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and gold. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply, the air rich with the smell of asphalt and distant rain. She didn't know what her future looked like. She didn't know if she could ever feel whole again. But for now, she was moving forward. And sometimes, that was the bravest thing a person could do. She got back into her car, turned the key in the ignition, and pulled onto the highway. The horizon beckoned, wide and uncertain, and Olivia drove toward it, not with hope exactly, but with something more durable: defiance. The new town wasn't remarkable. A cluster of modest homes, wide streets lined with cottonwood trees, a quiet main street with a diner, a library, and a tiny grocery store, perfectly ordinary, and that was what Olivia needed most. She rented a small apartment above a bookstore. The ceilings were low, the paint peeling in places, but the windows overlooked the park, and in the evenings the breeze carried the scent of cut grass and honeysuckle. No one knew her name. No one flinched when they saw her face. She was just another woman with too many moving boxes and tired eyes. Olivia spent the first few days unpacking in silence. Each item she pulled from the boxes carried its own ghost. The baby blanket folded so carefully it had never been used. The stack of lesson plans from a career that felt like it belonged to someone else. She didn't cry anymore. The grief sat inside her like an old injury, tender when pressed, but otherwise simply a part of her now. On her third evening, she wandered down to the park. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long, lazy shadows across the grass. Children shrieked and laughed at the swings. Couples walked their dogs. An old man fed ducks by the pond. Life, messy, indifferent, unaware. Olivia sat on an empty bench, just another woman among many, and closed her eyes against the golden light. She thought about Emma. She thought about what might have been. There would always be a hole in her life, a hollow place where dreams had once lived. No new town, no fresh start would ever erase it. And yet, she was breathing. She was watching the sunset. She was here, not because she had been stronger than Daniel, not because she had been braver, but because she had endured. That, in the end, was survival. Not triumph, not justice, just the simple, stubborn act of waking up one more day, of moving forward even when the weight of memory tried to pull you under. A small boy ran past, chasing a soccer ball, his laughter clear and bright. Olivia smiled, a fragile, broken thing, but a smile nonetheless. She rose from the bench and began walking back toward the bookstore. Tomorrow, she would unpack the last box. Tomorrow, she would buy groceries. Tomorrow, she would start the slow, halting work of building something that resembled a life. Not because she had to, not because she believed healing was inevitable, but because, despite everything, she could. And sometimes, that was enough. The past would always be with her, stitched into her skin, etched into her bones. But the road stretched forward, endless and waiting. And for now, Olivia chose to walk it, one careful step at a time.